G'day everyone and welcome to part one of From There to Here, a Trekzone Spotlight special presentation. I'm Matt Miller. Waiting for me in the LA studio is Carlos Pedraza. We're going to be chatting over the next three podcasts about Star Trek fan films. In this first edition, we're talking history and beginning with his work on Hidden Frontier. Well, he's flown into LA for me this afternoon. Carlos, thank you so much for your time, man.
Great to be here.
Now, in this three-part special, we're going to break it up and we're going to talk about the past, present and the future. I've sort of dubbed the last 15 to 20 years as the golden age of Trek fan films, and one of the first was Hidden Frontier, which you worked on. What got that started?
I read a news article about Axanar, which was also an early fan film in the early 2000s, and an excellent one set on the Axanar during the TOS era, and I was pretty amazed by it. And the article happened to mention that there was a Next Generation era set series that was filmed in Los Angeles, and at the time I was living in California as well, so I checked it out and got in touch with them and eventually ended up writing, becoming the staff writer for it and a producer.
And it was pretty groundbreaking for its time, given that it was using green screen quite extensively, and in those early episodes it was a little bit obvious. I think you might say.
Yeah, it was it was painfully obvious in the early seasons, but it was a group of fans who got better, learned better, got more people with experience involved at every level of the production, and it ended up, I think, being pretty successful for what it aimed to do. And, it spun off into, I think, 4 or 5 different series, including audio series. So it's become its own franchise that still operates today, headed up by some different folks. But audio dramas, I think, are what Hidden Frontier Productions is making these days. But it's still a pretty groundbreaking series because it has more episodes than I think any other fan film or Star Trek fan film, if just that has ever been produced. So the original series had 50 episodes, 7 seasons, just like a real Star Trek series. It had 2 other spin-off series immediately after, and they both went, I think, 2 or 3 seasons. And then, of course, the audio dramas have come up since then. So it, in its own small but important way, had a pretty great impact, because it's what led me directly into moving over to work at Star Trek New Voyages, because James Cawley, my good friend, was a fan of Hidden Frontier. In fact, he even appeared in an episode that I wrote, playing Mackenzie Calhoun, a character from Star Trek novels. And so he enticed me to come over and work with them, which I did for several years as a producer, a writer, and I did everything. I was an assistant director. I was a script supervisor. It was film school for me, and literally, because from that experience, I moved forward into becoming a independent screenwriter and producer myself, having just finished or putting the final touches on my 3rd feature.
Do you think that the last decade and a half has truly been the golden age of Trek fan films?
Oh, I think it's, I think definitely. I mean, since about 2000, fan films have been around a lot longer than that, of course, but, the technology really started to fall into place, and the means for distribution fell into place with the internet at the same time. And but even, it's way easier now. There was no YouTube when Hidden Frontier started. And we always tried to be very sensitive to not making it so look too professional. I don't think we could have anyway, but we went out of our way to be sensitive to the fact that we knew we were playing in someone else's sandbox, and wanted to make sure anyone that stumbled across it from CBS or Paramount would see this for what it was, and I think they did. Something that was produced from love and was no threat, and actually, helped promote the franchise. Those are the same arguments the folks who support Axanar make, and I think those arguments are good ones as far as they go. It's when you talk about other repercussions outside of those underlying sort of foundational reasons for why fan films deserve to exist, that Axanar got into trouble, but obviously we can talk about that when we get to our next segment. Golden age, technology and distribution, technology for production and technology for distribution, for wide distribution, fell into place at the right time.
And it really just expanded and exploded with social media coming about. As you said, YouTube, it just became, over the course of a decade and a half, just became so easy for anybody to produce their own take on Trek. I know that I was one of those there as well. I never had the full backing to be able to I mean, Hidden Frontier was one of my ambitions to be of that level. Never quite worked out with Eternal Night, but could you imagine Hidden Frontier now starting out with, or before the lawsuit, with the crowdfunding availability? And adding another aspect to it and being able to raise some money.
We actually had, not for crowdfunding, because of course that's even newer. That would be the third thing after production technology and technology for wide distribution. Crowdfunding would be the third thing that really spawned, or sent fan films into the stratosphere as far as this being the golden age. It's something, as you mentioned, we didn't have available for Hidden Frontier. And again, at that time, we would have been very careful about it anyway, because again, we were very sensitive about copyright concerns and that in no way could we be seen to be profiting off of Star Trek. And, the community of fellow fan filmmakers that grew up around that time, and we're all still friends today. We're all people who've weighed in on one side or the other on the Axanar controversy. We were very sensitive to that, and whenever we found out that some new fan film was trying to sell T-shirts or any kind of commercialization at all that could be construed as profiting off of Star Trek, we would come down on them. People would write them, or we would call them out on, in public forums like Trek BBS. Because we just didn't want to go into that territory. And we've seen now, 15 years later, that that is not a productive area into which fan films want to move.
So it very much was an unorganized organising committee in terms of keeping Trek fan films what they should be. They should be fan productions and not for profit and just for having fun.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't have a problem with people making use of the technology we have available today to make it as great looking as possible. I really don't, and I can't speak for CBS obviously, but my sense is that was not the trigger. I know Axanar would have you believe differently, but I don't believe that was the trigger for why the lawsuit happened and why we have those much more restrictive guidelines in place now. I think the thing that got their attention was the commercialization of the property. It turned into, and the judge even found this in his ruling, found that Axanar was a commercial production. He stated it as plainly as that. And fan films in the golden age were very dedicated to not getting close to that kind of activity.
Another fan film that came along was Star Trek Continues with Vic Mignogna. And there was sort of this healthy competition between him and James on New Voyages. New Voyages obviously having been around longer. But do you think there was a bit of a healthy competition going between some of the bigger productions?
Okay, well, that's a great question. Yes, I think there was and still is healthy competition. The landscape, of course, is very different now post Axanar and post guidelines. But I think as people began to see what other people were capable of doing, they wanted to do the same or better. Why not? You only have to look at Starship Intrepid, Nick Cook's production out of Scotland, which and I visited him twice and met the cast and crew there on 2 trips I've made to Scotland, and they were all very gracious. But you look at their production from when they began; they were concurrent with Hidden Frontier and still in production today, within the guidelines, clearly, cleanly. And you see a progress of quality in terms of writing and production that is, I think, a textbook example of what fan films could be, should be, have been, need to be.
Yeah, and it's something that the Axanar supporters have said is that it can't continue. Trek fan films cannot continue under these restrictive guidelines, and yet here's Nick Cook and his mates in Scotland continuing to make Intrepid, and the latest one is they're taking away the other characters that they've established over the last few years and focusing on new characters. Things can continue in their own little universe, and that's something that I think is promoting creativity amongst fans to explore different things.
Well, let me make 2 things clear. One is I don't like the guidelines. I don't like that they're as restrictive as they are. If I were in charge, I might have done it a bit differently. But do they stifle creativity? No, I don't think they do that. Do they promote people to be more creative because there's less that they can do in some ways? As a writer and producer today, I can testify that that less is more is a very good principle still in how you make something that's low budget but high quality. I'm not happy that we have guidelines that are so restrictive, but I'm more unhappy about why they were needed than the fact that they exist. And the fact that they do exist, I think, still leaves a lot. It's something we've never had before. No franchise has ever had, no studio, no major copyright holder has ever said, here are the boundaries under which we will not bother you. Stay in there and you're okay. Outside of those boundaries, they're not saying they're going to automatically sue you, because there may be people who do that. And they, in their evaluation of whether to sue a fan film, for goodness sake, they're not looking at whether you dotted your I's or crossed all your T's according to the guidelines. They're looking on whether there is some kind of financial impact that makes it necessary for them to invest the time and resources to go after someone in the legal system. And that has never happened in any iteration of any fan film, Star Trek fan film to date. It happened now, and it's pretty clear that it wasn't just the scope of the production, but also the manner in which the intellectual property was being exploited.
Do you think that it was inevitable that we were going to have a production that tried too hard, reached too high, because there was so much interference, if you like? There were so many productions out there that the next big thing needed to cut through all of that and make big claims and have absolutely sweeping visual effects, and obviously that costs money, so that there needed to be this massive budget. Almost on par with an independent, as they have said, an independent sci-fi film. Do you think we were inevitably coming to this point?
I've thought about that a lot, and I don't know that I believe in inevitability. I do believe that there was a path that fan films were on that had some red flags in it, and I think that people were playing a wait and see. How far can we go before something gets red flagged by the copyright holders? And I don't think that's a mystery. I mean, if you look at any of the literature from intellectual property attorneys who've written on this topic, both before and during and after the Axanar lawsuit, the first thing they say is like, look, we tolerate this use. We tolerate the use of our intellectual property by fans because there's a lot of upsides to it. That was part of Axanar's case, in fact. They had an expert who was coming in to make that point as an expert witness. But the problem was that tolerated use had some boundaries, and the boundaries were commercialization. If you are viewed as making money off of this property, that rings alarm bells. That's what happened in this case. I think that it's possible someone would have tried to do that, and it probably wouldn't have taken a lawsuit to shut that down. But Axanar was on a roll, and they kept extending their goals. It no longer became just a fan film; it became a professional, independent Star Trek production. Their words. It no longer was even primarily about producing the film. That took second place to the priority that was set to build out this studio. And again, I don't know if you want to get so far into this in this first segment or not, but the idea that, but the principle that once the property, the intellectual property, is being used to do something that's not the fan film, that essentially funds a new commercial enterprise, you're treading into territory that I think is pretty clear. I mean, it's across the line. You are funding a commercial enterprise with money that you raised under the auspices of being a fan film, a Star Trek fan film, and that's really clearly over a red line. I don't know that specific thing would have happened at this kind of scale in an inevitable fashion, but I think that there would have been other people that would have tested those limits. I think Star Trek Renegades tested those limits. They did not cross that line as far as CBS was concerned, obviously because they haven't sued them. So yeah, that it could have happened. It might have happened. I don't know that it was inevitable.
Do you remember if there was any sort of decision-making process along those lines when it was decided that Hidden Frontier would wrap?
Oh, for Hidden Frontier, I think we felt like it was time. We were guided by the fact that real Star Trek television series went 7 seasons. I joined the production in the 4th season, and after I became the series, the head writer for the series, one of the first things we did was sit down as producers and think about and plan out really through the end of the series. We followed a blueprint that we set over a sort of a weekend retreat for how that series was going to wind up. Along the way, of course, as Hidden Frontier's popularity grew and as its quality grew and people became more attached to several of the characters in it, it was a good opportunity to do as real Star Trek does, to spin off new series, to focus on the characters that were popular, to explore, different parts of the Star Trek universe, literally in terms of geography, because Hidden Frontier was sort of in a part of the Star Trek, galaxy, and we wanted to see other things. By that point, I had already left, but it was around that point that the discussions were in place or had started in terms of doing spin-off series. So we felt like 7 years was a natural conclusion for the storylines that had been established over the course of the series.
And it was all done without commercial venture and done by a group of fans that loved doing what they did, and they managed to achieve that for almost a decade. It's funny to imagine that now, especially with this one production saying that a commercial venture needs to happen in order to make a fan film.
Yeah, I think that Hidden Frontier was pioneering in a lot of ways, I think about what we might have been able to do the technical resources that are available today, and it could have. I mean, we were already moving in that direction by the time that the series ended, but. It could have been really great. And it was actually something that James Cawley and I and Rob Caves, the executive producer of Hidden Frontier, explored for a little while about sort of doing a reboot of Hidden Frontier that was more in line in terms of production value with what Star Trek New Voyages was doing. And, I think I even wrote a pilot script for that. But unfortunately, with Hidden Frontier coming to an end, and I was moving over to New Voyages, and New Voyages doing its own expansion, it never came to fruition. But it would have been great. But it's that kind of cross-pollination that you see that is another earmark of the golden age of fan films. That it wasn't about fan films just promoting themselves, but being a community that promoted all fan films, and and obviously they ranged in terms of quality and length and so forth, and but we were all in it together, and I think that golden age came to an end when we weren't able to be all in it together anymore.
I will admit to being a fresh-faced teenager and watching on in awe as Hidden Frontier was released over those 7 years, and New Voyages came along, and it really was sort of what prompted me to start Trekzone, and I was very much a little bit late to the party, so I'm here now talking about it and reliving those years as with actually speaking to the people that made it all happen, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a birthday, so I'm old, and because and the reason I bring it up is because I had a similar conversation to this with Tommy Kraft, and we're not really acquainted. We've spoken a few times over the time of the Axanar case, but one of the things he said to me was that Hidden Frontier was one of his favorite things growing up as a high school student, and I'm like, oh God. But I'm glad that it was. I mean, it had tens of thousands of fans. It was great, and I think for me it was part of my own professional development. And there's nothing wrong with fan films being that. And that was one of the things that Axanar offered people who became involved with it. That's always been an upside to fan films, is that you gain experience because it's Star Trek. You sometimes make contacts, professional contacts that can help. I mean, Gabe Kerner is a great example of that. He appeared in Trekkies. Obviously, he was a guest star on Hidden Frontier. He's worked on Battlestar Galactica. He's a great example of a fan that became a professional. And there are others of us out there. So I think we look back on our experience with fan films and want that to be possible for other people, younger people or new people. And that was one of the reasons why I started Axanar, because I knew that the implications of this case were going to have an effect, very possibly a deleterious one, on fan films in general. And so that was my sort of emotional stake in starting Axamonitor. We see where we've ended up. I mean, fan films survive, and we have guidelines which have pluses and minuses. But it's definitely a different landscape than it was, when I started in 2003 with Hidden Frontier.
Well, Carlos, stay right there, because in the next part we are going to chat about that case and delve deeper into the timeline and all those sort of things. So I really appreciate you joining me, and I look forward to part 2.
Great, thank you.